Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show.
But there are a few things that we've ticked off with this, even just from an iPad point of view, that we've always wanted to do. And there are so many, if you're looking at, keyboard shortcuts for Apple keyboard, for example, properly using the Apple Pencil to its sort of full advantage, being able to use a double tap while you're handwriting for automatic recognition, lasso select, switching between handwriting and selection, whether using your finger or the Apple Pencil.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. Back on the show is Chris Swaffer, who was on episode 4 of the show. He is the product manager at PreSonus, the creators of the awesome music notation software Notion. Since we last spoke, they've done a bunch of updates to Notion, including version 3 that launched late last year. In this episode, which was recorded before WWDC, we chat about how he uses the iPad and how Notion has changed since we last spoke. One iPadOS 17 feature I wanted to share in this introduction is the new personal voice feature that lets you record 15 minutes of prompts, and from that your iPad will generate an AI version of your own voice. You can use this voice in communication apps like FaceTime, and anywhere in the operating system pull up a live speech window to convert what you type to an audio version of that. It takes a great amount of time to generate this voice. I did this on the iPhone 14 Pro Max, and to generate your voice, the iPhone must be charging with the screen off. It took 3 or 4 nights for this work to complete, and if you hadn't noticed, this introduction is an example of what that can sound like. For those curious, the easiest way to capture this audio to share in a podcast like this is to do a simple screen recording, and thankfully Ferrite works natively with video files, so no conversion was required. As a reminder, you can support the podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros, or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. My great thanks to everyone that supports the show. It is greatly appreciated. With that, here is my interview with Chris. Enjoy.
Welcome back to the podcast, Chris. It's been a bit. You were back on episode 4 back in August 2017, so you're one of the very first guests. So welcome back.
Wow, thanks for having me again. I can't believe it's been so long. But a lot's happened since. But thanks for having me again.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're part of the team that creates Notion, and there's both a desktop and a mobile version that we spoke about last time, and we're now at version 3. And lots probably happened since we spoke as well with the version 2 updates and stuff. But before we get to all of that, I'm curious about your iPad usage. 2017 is when the iPad Pro first came out. We've had a lot of, hardware and OS revisions. How has the iPad been treating you? How has your usage of that shifted over the years?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, when the iPad Pro came out, and obviously your new podcast, and then we were featured as one of the best apps for iPad Pro when it first came out. So we had one of the initial units to play with.
Yeah.
And it was really exciting, and of course, since the capability of these machines has just got better and better, and, back in the earliest days of Notion on iOS, we were putting up, warnings saying if you have more than, 16 instruments playing, you might have some problems.
Right.
It's not really a problem anymore. So in terms of usage, it's just such a more capable machine to use, and of course, there's all this discussion about the convergence between the Mac and the iOS land. My personal usage is now, fully committed with the Apple Pencil, and a small iPad now is my sort of go-to rather than the bigger iPad Pros.
Mm-hmm.
But that pencil and the newest iPad Mini is just so portable, and That's what's really changed, I think. Not carrying around the big iPad, but smaller iPad with an Apple Pencil has just been fab.
Nice. Yeah, I hear so much praise about the Mini. I want one. I can't justify it really quite yet, but I do want one of those things. It's a nice little form factor, and kind of reminds me back in college days of bringing a little notebook with me to jot down musical ideas and stuff. Yeah, with the pencil in it, especially.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And having something in that form factor that you're traveling with, and you can also bring up your books and everything else, and then just flip over to Notion without bringing out this sort of kind of laptop-sized
Yeah.
screen. That's really transformed making music on the go for me.
Yeah. Do you use the Mini as kind of a reference device during your general workday as you're probably working primarily on the Mac and then kind of referencing stuff on the Mini?
Yeah, for sure. And I have everything set up in my studio here, and then if I'm somewhere else in the house, or if later on in the evening, I go, there was that one thing, and then the files are there, they're in iCloud, and it's just such a seamless experience. So it's definitely sort of my go-to, and sometimes I just go straight to it, even if I have my Mac in front of me.
Yeah, very cool. So Notion 3, before we get into that, I just want to just catch up the stuff we missed between that when we last spoke. 2.5 was another big update since we last spoke. I'm curious, anything worth pointing out from that one before we dive into version 3?
I think 2.5, so this must have been 2020-ish.
Yeah.
So the big ones there were we did a lot of work on the Music XML implementation, which is this shared file format which you can use between different notation software. We did a lot of work to try and get that up to scratch with the latest improvements in the Music XML schema. We also added the ability to add custom templates, so you can save a Notion file as your own template and recall it. And I think the two big things were exporting as MP3. We introduced a standard. As historically, it used to be a paid licensing thing, but it's not anymore, and we just hadn't added it to Notion on iOS, so that it was export as MP3. And I think the last big thing for 2.5 was importing a MIDI file into Notion iOS and applying good notation to it. So actually having proper beaming and engraving rules set on an imported MIDI file so that you're not doing lots of editing after the fact.
Nice.
That was a big.
That's something in high school I loved doing the MIDI imports. I'd get like the Super Mario theme and throw that in the finale and see what it does. I can play around with it as a kid. Like, that stuff was just so much fun as a starting point to explore. Yeah. So so version 3. This came out the end of 2022. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a complete rewrite of the app. Is that accurate to say?
It is 100%. So we retained the kind of core notation rules, so we didn't have to do all that again.
Yeah.
But what we did is we had this opportunity to rewrite the app on the same software framework, source code, if you will, or the same libraries as our sister software, Studio One. Studio One is a well-known DAW that is owned by PreSonus, and we were taken over by PreSonus, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And so it'd always been on the cards, what we're going to do with these two softwares, and we'd had all these back and forward workflows with our desktop version of Notion and Studio One. But really, we knew ultimately we wanted to be able to natively send a Notion file into Studio One for it to open, and in a score editor. So our first step was, okay, we're going to have to rewrite this whole thing on Studio One source code. And it took a while.
Yeah.
Our first product actually wasn't Notion. It was actually the score editor for Studio One.
Yeah.
So our team worked on that first as like a sort of a minimum product. Then came Notion iOS, which became Notion Mobile, which is version 3. And then as we're adding features, and the next thing will be to replace Notion 6, the desktop version, also on this shared framework. So it was a big project to rewrite everything and also to sort of prepare the framework that Studio One sits on as well, to be able to support a notation program, but also basically a graphics program.
Right.
So there was a lot of groundwork to do. So we sort of went very quiet for a while in doing that, which, it has its own risks to go very quiet in the space, especially when there's other competitors coming in. But we knew that once we'd done it, we would have this shared code base with Studio One, and then all of our work and resources could be shared 100% with both platforms.
Yeah, the exciting thing, especially once you get the desktop translated over to be in that same code base, I'd imagine desktop, having Mac and Windows and iPad all and phone even all on the same platform means a lot of desktop features can start to make their way over to iPad if they make sense there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that started to happen, where some of the features that we've always had in Notion 6 desktop have actually now already made their way into this new Notion mobile. So, entering up to 4 voices or, playing, automatically soloing a selected instrument and playing just that one back. These are all ones that were just in the desktop, have never been in Notion iOS before. So some of these features are actually just filtering through, and we're just going, you know what, we'll just add them in.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's been a pretty cool thing. And also to just, like I said at the outset, you can send a Notion file from Notion into Studio One, and it opens natively. There's no XML, there's no MIDI. It's natively reading our notation.
So you don't have to translate it, which is super good. Once it's there and you work in it there's obviously features unique to Studio. Is it kind of there as its endpoint, like beaming it back in the Notion? Is that something that's kind of problematic because you'll lose stuff from the Studio, or?
Oh, it actually just stays as is. The score can be sent back and forth between Studio One and Notion, back and forward. In fact, you can even make updates and then merge those updates into the file that's open in Studio One. There are some features, editing features, etc., that aren't in Studio One, but that doesn't mean that you can't see them, for example.
That's awesome. And so Studio One, its goal is very different from Notion, which is also on desktop. Can you kind of go over its goal versus Notion and kind of the task at hand for each of the apps?
Yeah, so for Studio One, it's a digital audio workstation, and it's primarily for audio editing, but also for music creation and composing, where traditionally that your composing would be in sort of piano roll or kind of MIDI note editing.
Yeah.
And the score editor is just another view of seeing those notes. It's not necessarily a notation engraving tool. So you would do all that probably within Notion, but you can still use the score editor in Studio One to do composing if that's how you think.
Yeah.
Or, bang out a quick lead sheet and have Studio One work out all your transpositions so you don't have to worry about it if you're in a session. So it's a different environment of which the scoring is a smaller part.
Yeah.
But this is what Studio One does. You can still compose, create, edit, and also master in one application.
Nice. And so with version 3, the big task at hand was the rewrite. Feature-wise, are there some things, you mentioned a couple already, but what are you most excited to have on iPad now with version 3?
Well, the biggest thing is that there's the cross-platform nature, which we could come on to, because of course if we're just talking about iPads, then that could be something else we talk about later. But for sure, being able to have an application that's truly cross-platform that works across iOS, iPadOS, Mac, Windows, Android, Amazon, and Fire OS, being able to work on a single application that at its core is the same, but then can just go into all these applications. All these operating systems. So that's the big one. And of course, being able to natively open in Studio One. But there are a few things that we've ticked off with this, even just from an iPad point of view, that we've always wanted to do. And there are so many, if you're looking at, keyboard shortcuts for Apple keyboard, for example, properly using the Apple Pencil to its sort of full advantage, being able to use a double tap while you're handwriting for automatic recognition, lasso select, switching between handwriting and selection, whether you're using your finger or the Apple Pencil, but also some notation things as well. Right now you can select a passage of music and then paste it into different rhythmic positions. And even if that crosses a bar line or something, then Notion will respell the durations, create ties, or bring notes together depending on where they are in the bar. And so it reflows that pasted music. So, and that's been something that, well, personally, I've always wanted in Notion, and we were able to take this opportunity to go right deep down into what we can do in selection in this rewrite and be able to paste reflow. So yeah, there's a few big things that even aside from the big things like being able to go cross-platform that have really helped workflow and really still feel like a an iPad application, even though it's now cross-platform.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the copying into whoever rhythmic area is exciting as a composer because you get to experiment without having to like manually enter some stuff. And how would this work here? And especially with fugues and stuff, that's always, yeah.
For sure. Absolutely.
And it's very exciting. The Apple Pencil's like fully integrated, and because a lot of times when you do cross-platform stuff, it can be a challenge to implement that stuff because it is so universal, as far as how that works.
Yeah, and we also have to consider, well, Notion Mobile now works on a Windows Surface. So with that capability, can we do the same thing with the Surface Pen, for example?
Yeah.
And what about a Samsung stylus, an S Pen? Or you have to think through all these things, think how many of these can be translated into all these things before we go ahead, because what we really wanted to do was make this a seamless experience for the user. No matter what platform they're on, they will still see all those features regardless of what platform they're on. So yeah, there's a lot to sort of think through and design, but yeah, for sure.
How is file sharing implemented? Like, so if you're only on Apple platforms, can you just use iCloud and directly store it within Notion through iCloud? But say you're on Windows and Android and iPad, is Dropbox there for you to store stuff there? Is that option to kind of store stuff where it works best for you in the app?
Yeah, like many other apps, you have access to any of your cloud providers you want to the file picker. You can select from iCloud or Dropbox or OneDrive, Google Drive, all on your iPad. And of course, you also get iCloud for Windows, and so you can just save in the folder there as well. So yes, you can use all your cloud providers across all those platforms. But the other thing for Notion as well, you can also transmit directly from device to device.
Okay.
So if
you could be offline even doing that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're you still need to be on the same network.
Yep.
That's how it works. The network doesn't have to be connected to the internet. So you can just have a Notion file on your Android phone and just transmit to an open running instance of Notion on your iPad, or Studio One on your desktop, or Notion 6 on your Mac. It will show and list all of your running instances of Notion and Studio One, so you can just transmit directly. That's part of the feature bundle that's available.
That's really cool. Yeah. How has this cross-platform affected you as a composer? Do you do much composing these days, or I'm not sure how much you're able to tear away from your main job to enjoy doing the composing?
Well, just in case they're listening, of course, I work very hard all the time. I do a fair bit of arranging, and actually during the sort of testing process of Notion Mobile, I was pretty much doing all of my arranging, even for full orchestra on Notion Mobile, to really test it out and see if we had the capabilities for starting a score, but even going through to fully printing for a full orchestra, a real life example. And so I was doing this on Notion Mobile on my Windows desktop machine.
Yeah.
So not a tablet. On my big monitor that I've got here, fully taking advantage of all the space. And then, like I said before, then, I'd think of something and I just whip open my iPad and carry on from there. So, I got to arrange some TV tunes and stuff using just Notion Mobile, full orchestra Notion Mobile on Windows and on iPad as well. So for me, the cross-platform thing has been fantastic because I can just have it on whatever device. It does mean that for us in the QA department as well, there are devices everywhere. So that had its own challenges.
I can imagine.
But for me personally now, I sort of switched to Android phone for Notion Mobile to just get a proper feel of natively being a native Android user. So now I'm sort of Android phone, iPad, Mac, and Windows desktop, and working pretty happily between all of those things, no matter what's to hand. Because as I say, Notion looks and works exactly the same, depending on what platform you're on.
Very cool. And as far as handwriting recognition, how's that improved since version 2? That's always a tricky thing to kind of nail and get right, and there's always improvements to be made.
Yeah. We pretty much started again with our implementation of the technology. I mean, we licensed the actual recognition technology from a company called MyScript. They have all the handwriting comparisons, and they spit out kind of basic notes, and it's up to us where we put them. So we can always improve that implementation of that technology. And we sort of started again with our implementation in version 3 for Notion Mobile, which has given us some flexibility. It means we can do this, for example, this automatic switch between pencil and finger. You can now enter notes on a 5-line drum staff, which you couldn't before. So it doesn't have to be a treble or bass clef staff. And then also incorporating this lasso select with the Apple Pencil. So as you're handwriting, you can then actually just ring round some existing notes, and then that selects those notes for you to edit in the future. So we've been able to sort of go back, improve, and then build on the old implementation.
Something I'm curious about with the M2 iPad Pros, which there's some people that have them, but it's not widespread quite yet, but will be one day as technology gets older and older, is the hover ability with Apple Pencil. And I remember back when I did use a Mac, with a mouse, you'd have like a preview of like what note you're about to enter when you click. Is something like that possible now with hover and Apple Pencil, previewing a note before you click it in and add it to a staff? Is that something your team's explored implementing?
We definitely investigated the functionality when it came out, as we do any time Apple introduced something. And for sure, this is, of course, the use case that comes up is, can we make keyboard shortcuts float and appear on an iOS device if you were using this? So,
right.
I think it's a really obvious one to tick off. As it stands at the moment, we also don't have floating keyboard shortcuts on the main palette, which is something we are addressing in the next version. But for sure, the hover functionality is there. But again, as I said before, you sort of have to look across platforms. Is this something we can replicate on other devices as well, or would this just be iPadOS only kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't even know if Windows, if Surface has anything similar to it. I imagine others will start to do that if they haven't already. Something I love about Notion is it is the window is not a set iPad window. It's one of those free-flowing, can take up a full external monitor and all its real estate window. And it really does work well on an external monitor and iPad now with iPadOS 16. So that's been amazing. Something I'm curious about is more tool boxes and panels. Like, do you see a future where you're able to, when you're on a bit external, to fill it up with some more input options there with the bigger window?
Yeah, and I think, well, firstly to say is thanks for saying that, because that was probably the biggest challenge of this whole redesign was, okay, here's the brief. It's got to go on an iPhone SE, the smallest screen, up to the biggest external monitor and still be usable.
Yeah.
You know, and also we have no control over when we go into Android screen sizes and, you know, how do we do this?
You have foldables over there as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's, or even in the iPad, once you get into split screen and start dragging the separate windows around, you know, you have to make sure the app is still usable. You can still get to the buttons. It doesn't cut anything off with all your safe zones and notches and all kinds of things. So
yeah, that was
certainly a big challenge. I think, you know, I have an iPad SE here, which was my old iPhone, and a huge, great monitor that I was going between doing these orchestral arrangements, and it's a really nice looking kind of screen. Again, it's all about the page. It's not about having loads of buttons in front of you. It's about you in the composition process and you in the notes, as opposed to, you know, loads of toolbars and buttons. That said, we did improve in 3.1. You can now show an extended palette, so you can move the palettes from just one column, which you can scroll up and down, but you can just set it to 2 columns wide. And you can also set the UI, the general UI size into sort of bigger or smaller, depending on what size you've got. So I think we will keep looking at that as to what feedback we've got, you know, as to whether we want that to be customizable or whether we could make them even bigger and smaller. I think what we find with other software where you can customize and drag buttons in or out, we would like to just present, a good standard way of working first.
Yeah, and you don't want it too fiddly, I'm guessing, as well.
Yeah. And the more options tends to sort of kind of muddy things a little bit. But we're certainly open to having those kind of things suggested.
Yeah. So what is the input experience like in Notion these days? So if someone's wanting to start arranging or writing their own music, you have Apple Pencil, you have Touch, you have keyboards, or you have trackpads, you have MIDI keyboards. What are all the kind of different options out there?
Yeah, and there are a ton. And I think that's one of the strengths of Notion is that we say, okay, there's handwriting recognition, but we don't make you use it. We can say, okay, there's Bluetooth MIDI input for all, or MIDI input, cabled, wired input. And that's across all platforms, But again, you don't have to use it. It's just down to what you as a user feel more comfortable and quickest doing. For me personally, now I've got keyboard shortcuts. And if I'm here, then great. Keyboard shortcut, finger on the durations, maybe one hand on a MIDI keyboard for the pitch, and I am off.
Yeah.
But if I was just using the app for the first time, I can see the palette, I can see the duration, I can tap it, the duration, and I can tap it on the score. And I think that always is for Notion the sort of the number one first touch experience is I can see the duration, I'm going to tap it on the score. And it doesn't work like that for other notation software, but that's the first thing that everyone tries doing. What we've changed in that first touch a little bit in this version is that you can now, once you drop that in the score, you can drag it left and right for adding sharps and flats.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So that's no longer a trip back to the palette and to get an accidental and to put it on the note, and the same thing technology applies to a drum set. So if I put on a snare drum, I can drag it to the right to get like a rim shot or something like that. So, and you can see the labels come up. So it really is a much quicker way of writing. And then also new is you can make a selection of a number of notes and then drag up and down the whole lot.
Oh, nice.
Which you kind of expect it should have always worked like that, right? But it didn't. But now it does.
With MIDI keyboard, there's in my mind two ways people enjoy using that. The one way is the way where you have your duration already set up, before you enter anything, and then you hit the keyboard and it instantly enters that note. The other way is the way I personally like to do it is I'm improvising on the keyboard. Oh, I find the note I want. Then I hit the number pad of what duration I want for that held note. Is that second way a possibility yet? Or,
I mean, So holding the MIDI note first and then selecting the duration. Everything's possible. That seems a small change, probably an option. But like all features, it depends how many people are asking for it. And as to whether we do it, but yeah, for sure. I mean having a MIDI keyboard attached, as I said, I like using the keyboard durations to select the duration first and then the pitch.
Yeah.
And out of real time, so what we call step time, because you're doing it sort of step by step.
Right.
And some people like using the real time record. So you're saying you're improvising, but some people like to do that and record at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
So they have that outline. And actually, one thing we've changed there for input for Notion Mobile is that if you run out of road, Notion will just keep adding bars.
Oh,
now.
nice. Yeah.
Whereas before, it would just say, stop, you've reached the end. Stop being creative.
Yeah.
So whether you're in step time or real time record, now if you're onto something, then Notion will just keep.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. I've experimented doing you're performing and it's capturing that, and my accuracy has never been quite precise enough for me to make a go at that as the way for me to do it.
Yeah, that's the key word there is performing. I think what people do that is they perform in expecting a good result, but actually what you're doing is you're entering notes.
Yes.
So you have to sort of make this mindset switch to play with the metronome, stop being so expressive,
yeah,
and enter the notes.
Yeah.
So maybe this is a side project for our machine learning AI revolution. Is that it will compare your performance and create a good notated result from it.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting idea where like this has been an issue since in the 90s or whatever of like you're trying to perform something and the notation, it gets it down to a science of what you entered, even if you're like a 30-second note over, it's not smart enough to make that logic that you probably didn't want that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this is the MIDI holy grail of somehow knowing in the context and style of what you're playing, it should know what notes you actually want printed.
Yeah.
But maybe when our AI stop revolutionizing the medical industry and everything else, we'll think about music notation.
Right. So another input we haven't really talked about, virtual instruments, virtual keyboard. I'm not sure if there's others, drum kit or whatnot. What are those like now?
Yeah, I mean, we've come a long way. The first version of Notion on iPad was, 2010. And this was the only way of getting your notes in at that point. There was no touching the score or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was only with the piano keyboard. So, yeah, we've come a long way since then. As you say, there's an on-screen piano, an on-screen fretboard, and an on-screen drum pad. And it does work pretty much like before, but you can still now... on a smaller screen, you can slide the piano up and down whilst you're recording. So there's a sort of glissando area at the top, whereas before that was fixed in real-time recording in the last version. So that's changed. Mm-hmm. And for the drum pads, there's more drum pads available. And you can also assign, by long pressing the drum pad, you can assign different labels and different drums and effects to those pads depending on what you're doing. So there's a bit more flexibility in those instruments. Also, if you don't want the keyboard, you can use the drum pads to enter notes for a flute if you want. So if you don't select drums, you select a flute part, then you'll see the pitches, G4, A4 or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you can just use that as a text label to enter notes in a specific part. So yet another way of entering notes that might suit you in the workfloa.
So once the notes are in there, and you want to add all your, articulations, your roadmap stuff about what you want to convey to the player, what's that process like? Are you able to use lasso to do different things? And
and you can double click or double tap rather. The measure before to select the whole thing, or select all, or select part, or whatever, but or lasso if you're in handwriting mode. And what selection has done, if we changed it from being a range-based select to actually being object-based. So you can really get in with your lasso select and cut in between an accent and a note and come around and just select the top of another part, and it will only select those items that you've put in that
nice.
lasso selection. So there's much more granular control over your selection.
Yeah.
But now we've also done that, then you've got a lot more flexibility with it. So you could just select, for example, the highest note of a bunch of chords. So you can select highest note or select lowest note. Then you can just cut and paste it into a different part if you want to. You can send those selected notes to the other hand. If you're playing piano, you can select the bottom notes with your right hand and just jump them over to the left hand. So it's given us a lot more flexibility and a lot more power in this new selection tool.
Nice. Yeah. Something, another one of those, like, I don't think I've seen this anywhere implemented, is basically performing your dynamics. I've noticed that you have a little mixing board where you're able to change the volume of the playback. I'd love if some company, if Notion, for instance, would let me do a live playback of my score, and I'm just listening to like one voice, and I'm able to drag that slider up and down to just in real time do crescendos, and maybe there's a way so it's not doing a crescendo but just jumping from one dynamic to another. Just with that little, slider or some kind of mixing board to implement that stuff.
Yeah, and what we're discussing, I think, is really volume automation.
Yeah.
Which, in all fairness, is available in other notation apps, but it is also available in Notion 6 Desktop.
It is, okay.
In two ways. You can either record kind of MIDI CC data to affect not just volume, but expression or other things. But you can also, in Notion 6 Desktop, engage something called end tempo, which with an attached MIDI keyboard is a tap tempo feature.
Yeah.
Which, okay, tap tempo, that's a thing. But it's also velocity sensitive. So you can tap it harder and softer for the whole score to sort of have expression and also rubato. And then it can either save that as a much more human performance to share, or you can use it in real time because really robust. You can use it to accompany a solo clarinet player or a choir or add strings to a rock band. It's been designed for live use. That's still one of the real big differentiators between Notion Mobile and Notion 6 Desktop is this live performance aspect. So, short answer is
okay.
Yes, you can, but just not in Notion Mobile. Maybe it's something we add in the future because N-Tempo is a really popular feature in the desktop version.
Yeah, and once the shared code base comes over, that stuff might be easier to move over if you wanted to. Yeah. Vocalists, has anything changed there as far as their needs for lyrics and other things that singers may need for writing or arranging?
Yeah, I mean, like everything else, we've redone things from scratch. So lyrics are a bit easier to input now, especially multiple lyric verses. And we've done a lot of work on lead sheets in particular. So maybe not Vocalists per se, but the whole lead sheet idea is we've really done a lot of work on slashes and chord symbols and placement and even the library of chord diagrams that you can enter into a Notion Mobile lead sheet so that you can really get everything you need for a lead sheet in one go, including stuff for vocalists like lyrics and things.
Nice, yeah. So at the very beginning of our conversation, you mentioned old iPad Pro. I think it was 16 instruments. Where after that you'd start to have issues with playback. Are there instrument limitations? I know the free version you get, I believe, 4 staves. You can just download the app and start writing with a couple instruments. What's kind of the breakdown as far as what you can put in your scores?
There's no limits.
Amazing.
That's the big thing. So
that's awesome.
You download Notion Mobile for free. There are no limits on the amount of instruments you can add. So if you want to write an orchestral piece with 120 staves, you go at it.
That's awesome.
All in the free version.
Wow.
The free version also comes with the standard pack of orchestral sounds that we recorded with the London Symphony Orchestra at Abbey Road, specifically for Notion. You get that standard orchestral bundle and some rhythm and guitars and drums, obviously. That is all part of the free version. Now, if you wanted to unlock some auxiliary instruments, maybe you want a cor anglais or a bass sax or something, then that's part of the feature bundle. There's some additional sounds available. And that also unlocks the handwriting and the transmit function that we've already spoken about.
Okay.
But yeah, there's no limits to the actual amount of staves you can write for in that free version, and you get those samples, you get those sounds to play with. So I think, from anyone's point of view, it's a really powerful package to just get going and get composing. But we're also really thinking about education. Things are tough at the moment in terms of budgets and things.
Yeah.
So the whole bring your own device model for education is pretty much there as well. A lot of them are turning to subscription packages, which not every school can cope with. And it might be tricky for the kid to get online at home.
Absolutely.
But now they can have this free version from all these different app stores, and they can just keep going and then transmit to their teacher directly if they are not on their iCloud or whatever. So, yeah, it's been a big deal just making that available to as many people as we can, which was what we did with Notion iOS in the first place, 13 years ago.
Yeah.
We remember at that time, notation software was like $600.
Yes.
Along comes Notion with a $15 app saying, hey, try this out. Like, you have to buy an iPad, but, have a go with this. And now we're in a position where you can buy, one of the better value iPads that's still really capable.
Yeah.
And for no extra money, get a fully functioning notation software on board. So I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, that's huge because most apps that do have free versions, you get maybe 4 is pretty typical as far as the number of instruments you're able to add to a score. So that's awesome to hear. As far as sharing and exporting, we've talked about it's universal now with all the different versions that you guys have out there, and then there's MP3 export, which is huge for just sharing what something sounds like. Anything else on sharing and exporting that we haven't touched on already?
Yeah, I mean, because we were now shared with Studio One's code, which is a fully featured audio editing application, we were able to steal a few more things. Hopefully they won't notice.
Yeah.
But we've not just got MP3 now, but we've also got M4A, Opus, FLAC, export, and are able to also set the resolution and bitrate for different things as well. Export as a WAV file, etc.
Yeah.
So there's a much more flexibility in actually exporting the audio from Notion. Opus and FLAC are part of the feature bundle, but as standard, as part of the free version, you can export as MP3 or WAV file and have all those export options to the audio as well. We've really opened that up. In terms of course, you can export as music XML. And as a PDF, you can export just the score or the part you're on, or a single PDF with all the parts in part order. There's a load of different export functions.
That's great. And I'm curious, is there a way to say mute? You just want to export one part of the audio, say just like the tenor sax audio. You mentioned you can export PDFs of just a single instrument. Can you do that with the audio export as well?
Yeah, absolutely. You just go into the mixer, solo the part, and export.
Nice.
Done. So 3 clicks.
Awesome. Yeah. Very cool. And then version 3.1 has come out since version 3 came out, since it's been a bit. Anything of note here? I know the lasso selection, which we've talked a lot about, has been greatly improved.
Yeah, lasso selection, and also we mentioned briefly being able to select a number of measures over a number of different instruments and just play those, which is great if you want to just test a chord or something. You can just drag a rectangle around that first note and just hit play, and you can hear just a selection of maybe the woodwind or something.
Yeah.
So it just stops you having to go into the mixer, soloing a bunch of instruments and coming back, hitting play. It's just play back this and only this. That's been real time saver. We did a load more to chords, adding different multiple chords to empty measures. So this is all the lead sheet improvements, basically. One thing that was really nice was actually to focus on notation engraving features.
Yeah.
It's quite common to sort of get really excited about all these different audio and network transmission and all this kind of stuff and cross-platform. But sometimes you just want to hide a key signature.
Yes.
For now, like we did stuff. I mean, it's like French horns, for example, don't traditionally have a key signature. That you just add all the accidentals as you go.
Yeah.
So now there was no way in old Notion to select that in the instrument. So now by default you can hide the key signature if you need to, and then it will just show all the accidentals to the piece. Little things like that that just make your final output look more professional, without even thinking about it.
Yeah. That's really cool. And yeah, I actually forgot the French horns did that, and thinking back, that does look very familiar when I was looking over scores and arranging. It's like, why are the French horns in a different key that they aren't? Yeah. Anything we haven't covered in 3 or 3.1 they'd like to touch on before we start to wrap it up?
Yeah, for sure. We were able to add demo files back into Notion on mobile. We always had them, from 2010 we had some demo scores, and then when we moved to the sort of iOS file handler that Apple provided, there was nowhere to really put them.
Yeah.
But now we have this cross-platform kind of file open screen, then that's all ours, and we can go, okay, finally, we can have some demo scores. So we put demo scores back in the app, and we're going to be adding to that as well, so to build up that library of available scores, because people really like hearing the Notion sounds, and they're like just experimenting, see what's possible.
Right.
And I think demo scores is a really cool thing to include, even just to sort of hear some of the sounds back again. And we did a load of work on the chords. I mean, the other thing that's happened, which I haven't mentioned, is that, Notion got taken over by PreSonus about 10 years ago, but a year and a half ago, PreSonus got acquired by Fender.
Oh.
So, now Notion is owned by Fender musical instrument company, and so I think we have to really make sure our guitar tablature and chords and everything are really on point.
Yeah.
So it's not the only reason. We knew we had to make these improvements,
Yes.
but it's a really big reason. We want to make the
makes sense.
the guitar chords, and you might also notice that the Notion logo has evolved.
Yeah.
But instead of a violin in the top left, we also have a Fender Strat. It's a very subtle change in the Notion logo to shout out to our new owners.
Have you guys gone in and for the guitar playback used Fender instruments yet as a thing?
I'm not going to confirm or deny what guitars are used in the initial samples. But the guitarist who did the electric guitarist was Neil Zaza, a fantastic player who did the acoustic and guitar samples. And there's no reason to replace Neil Zaza.
Yeah.
He's a legend.
Yeah, that'll be a fun
classical
future
guitar
where you're
samples.
able to I want Selmer saxophones or Yamaha saxophones. That'd be very lot of work to go into do that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But so we're not going to replace Neil's amazing playing, but yeah.
Yeah. So you've already mentioned kind of one of the next big things is desktop Notions, getting the cross-platform rewrite. Anything else that you're able to share about kind of what you guys are working on?
Yeah, well, we are working on 3.2, which may or may not have come out by the time this comes out, which we're looking at more places to get Notion from. I mean, you can get Notion now from the Apple, Mac, and iOS stores. That's also new as well. Notion Mobile 3 is you can get it from the Mac App Store.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So and there was two options there because you can make your iOS app run on an M1 or M2 Mac.
Right.
But we decided actually, we already have this cross-platform code. We might as well just optimize it for the Mac and just do it separately through the Mac App Store. So that we decided to do that. So yeah, and that's going really well. People, we didn't know what would go well there because of course it's not a touch screen. But there's been really big numbers on the people getting from the Mac App Store.
That's great. Yeah, I love the Mac App Store. When I do use a Mac, it's like I can just log in and install everything. The problem's always been not everything's there you want to be, so it's good that Notion is there.
And again, it's a free app, so it's good to try out. But aside from Apple, we're in the Microsoft Store, we're in the Amazon App Store for Fire devices, and of course in the Google Play Store. So this is all sort of new territory for us. It's a headache for release for sure. When one hasn't been accepted for review and the others have, but just making notation software accessible across the board, free of charge, in all those app stores and all those places. So for 3.2, there'll be more places that we're going to add on to that. And excitingly, more notation features. I mean, after years of working on foundation level, audio and things for this rewrite, now we can put our attention back to, notation features, which is a real, it's good fun for us because we can get back to talking about, I want to hide tuplet numbers.
Yes. So, as far as upgrading from the free to the paid version, to me, there's two options. Is that right? You can do in-app purchase for an individual platform, say iPad, or you guys have this whole account system where I believe it's a single kind of purchase to unlock across devices. Is that right?
Yeah. So really, it's your choice. We're not locking you into a costly subscription if you don't want to. Per platform, if you're only on iPad or iOS, then it's $15. It's a one-off purchase. It's not recurring. And that opens up for the feature bundle. That gives you your handwriting. It gives you the extra sounds. It gives you the transmit feature. It gives you those extra audio formats that we talked about. And that's a one-off payment. So you pay for that on iOS, and that'll unlock for your iPad and your iPhone. Now, if you are completely across platforms and you want to use it on Windows, or you might have an Android phone, then yes, that's two payments then, because of course they're all walled purchase schemes, which still might work out for you. But the option here is to use PreSonus Sphere. If you're a Sphere member for PreSonus, this gives you cross-platform. So you sign in to the app, whatever device, whatever platform you're on, and it will unlock for you. But also PreSonus Sphere gives you Notion 6 Desktop, which we've been discussing as well. It also gives you Studio One Professional, and it gives you all the add-on and content that come with Notion 6 and Studio One. So all that extra stuff that would also be a paid extra also comes included in your Sphere membership. There's loads of exclusive video tutorials, there's collaborative workspaces, there's cloud storage, there's a load of benefits to PreSonus Sphere. But again, it's an option. So if you don't want to do the membership thing and the recurring payment, you don't have to. You could just unlock what you need on Notion Mobile on that platform and leave the rest alone.
Yeah.
But it's up to you.
So Sphere, with the cloud storage, you could log in to Sphere to unlock all the features, and your files would just be in every instance you're logged into. Is that accurate? Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the cloud storage works best with Studio One, and if you're on mobile anyway, it's probably going to be easier and best to use, iCloud
or
Dropbox,
whatnot.
whatever you're using. But yeah, for sure.
So, you guys have been developing Notion, as you said, 13 years, 2010. And in that time, or in the past few years, I should say, there's been some new up-and-comers. You may have heard of Sibelius and Dorico. They now have iPad versions. That how do you kind of see you guys in this space, and do those apps push you to do different things that you may not have done otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, the notation market is it's always been an exciting one. I've been in it and from Notion from 2009, but before I was working for Finale in the UK as a specialist there. And things change. It's really exciting as the technology changes and devices change. Then, and so do the applications as well.
Yeah,
I mean, Notion actually has been around since 2005. And that in itself was based on a product that came out in 1989.
Yeah,
Music Printer Plus. I mean, so Notion itself has gone through a lot of changes itself in that time as the market has changed to the 90s and onward. Notion going into the iOS space in 2010 certainly was an amazing thing for us and probably helped change how people use iPads. I mean, there was a lot of attention on Notion at the time, and composing on Notion helped with that Apple TV ad that came out maybe 2014 now.
Yeah.
And so I think it's inevitable that some of the more desktop version apps come out in this space as well. As to the actual market, then it just sort of depends how you view it. I think there's space in the market as the apps, although they are all notation apps, have different business models, attract different sorts of customers, have different onboarding processes, have different sort of first touch. I think they're distinctly different enough to cater for different types of user. I've always said, I'm not going to ever walk into Boozy and Hawkes or Audition Peters to see them slaving away on Notion, creating an engraved Urtext edition of a Beethoven symphony. That's just not our market.
Right.
We really want to help people just get composing as quick as possible, get their notes in, whatever level they're at, professional, amateur, young, with the best sounds out of the box without having to sort of install loads of stuff or have to hook things up. It's just got to be easy and simple to use and great to listen to. And that's always going to be our kind of MO. So I think there's space in the market for it. Certainly with the different business models will sort of probably change and alter over time.
Yeah.
I've seen them already. Our different competing apps have changed what they offer for the free version and the paid version, etc.
Yeah.
And that will probably shift over time as well.
Yeah. No, it's definitely exciting. And as you said, this space has been competitive in the desktop space since when I was in college and before, I'm sure. And in the old days, Finale and Sibelius were fighting it out, and Notion, as well. And it's exciting to see that same competition now in mobile, because competition helps people fight to win. And as you said,
it makes applications better, and not everyone survives. But if you see other applications that came through on desktop competing in the engraving space, then it's a bit of a tougher battle.
Yeah.
But the market is still there for it.
Yeah, and everyone likes to work a little bit differently. So like each app, like one may hit you more than another. Like I've tried Sibelius over and over again, and their way of working just has never clicked with me. So it's always, everyone has their different UIs that they prefer and different ways
absolutely.
of working.
I mean, I went from Sibelius, I don't know, 2, I guess I did in my master's portfolio on, and then ended up being the Finale clinician, and now at Notion. All I'd say is I'm just glad when I do a demo that I'm showing Notion. It's the most fun.
Yeah.
And to show a classroom full of kids, by the time you've even finished introducing yourself, they're already up and running. They're already entering notes. And it's just like, well, I didn't even need to show up.
Yeah.
I mean, the application is what it is, and here's the results.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I think that's about covers it. Where can people find more information about Notion 3? And as you said, you can kind of go to any app store and pretty much find it.
You can go on these old-fashioned things called websites and have a look, but just grab your favorite app store, search for Notion Music, and give it a go. It's free of charge.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate this chat. It's been far too long.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Good to chat with you again, Tim.
Well, that was my interview with Chris. My thanks again to Chris for his time recording, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. You can support the podcast over at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. With that, I'll talk with everyone again real soon.